Happy Diwali everyone! Welcome back to episode 27 of Manny's Food Channel. It's your boy Mansoor, aka Manny, and for today's episode I'm going to be making not only one, not two, but three different kinds of recipes. During the Diwali celebration, it's all about getting together with friends and family and enjoying that around a good table of food. So for today's episode, I'm going to be making three different things. On the left side I have Barfi, which is made with powdered milk. In the middle is one of my all-time favorites, which is Jalebi, or in Iran we call it Zulubia. Both of them are extremely similar. And on the very right, I have Gulab Jamun. Now this Gulab Jamun is not your typical one where it's constantly soaked in syrup. It's deep fried, soaked in syrup just for a couple minutes and then removed and let it sit overnight, and the flavor the next day is absolutely delicious. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. So the first thing we're going to do before we start anything is we're going to go ahead and prepare our mixture for the jalebi. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare this at least a day before, just to let it ferment overnight in a warm area. So all I have here is all-purpose flour, and I have some warm water. I'm not going to add it in all together. I'm going to add it in batches to make sure that I remove any of the lumps before I continue to add in more water. So now I'm just going to give this a nice mix, and I'm going to continue to do this until all my water is incorporated. Cover it with a towel and leave it in the oven overnight to ferment. And in the meantime, we'll move on to working on the other ingredients for the other two recipes. So now that I put the jalebi mix in the oven, the reason why I put it in the oven is because it's probably the warmest part of the house that I can put it in. So I'm going to leave that overnight. And now we're going to move on to the Barfi recipe. And to start off, we're going to make a very simple syrup. So it starts off with a little bit of water, some ginger, to get a bit of that fresh ginger flavor in there. Add in some granulated sugar. And lastly, I have some rose water. If you don't know where to get rose water, then you can get it from any Middle Eastern or Indian grocery market. And now I'm just going to give this a quick mix, bring it up to a boil, and then bring it down to a very light simmer and let it simmer for at least 10 minutes to get some of that nice ginger infusion in there. And while we're waiting for this simple syrup, we'll move on to making and preparing the rest of the ingredients for the Barfi. So all three of these recipes don't take a lot of time. From start to finish, the prep time probably takes a maximum of about an hour. The longest part of any of these recipes is actually the setting time and how long it actually takes to set. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some cream to this powdered milk. I'm not going to add it in all at the same time because I'm looking for a thicker, more coarse consistency, not a liquid consistency. So I'm going to add in little of the cream at a time and fold in as much as I could before I continue to add in more batches of the cream to achieve that desired consistency that I'm looking for. So now what I'm going to do, if your mixture is a little bit too thick and kind of has some lumps, I would run it through a sieve just to remove some of those lumps. If not, now you can move on to the next step. I'm just going to break this mixture up a little bit, and I remove the ginger from the simple syrup. I'm not going to add it in all at once. I'm going to add it in batches as always, and make sure that the Tupperware or the bowl that you're using is heat resistant. You don't want the simple syrup to melt through. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to gradually fold in and add in the simple syrup until all of it is incorporated. So now that the mixture is fully mixed, you gotta act quickly at this part because you don't want the mixture to set. So what I have here is a baking pan or a glass baking sheet. What I did here is I just buttered the molds, or buttered underneath, so just in case it doesn't stick to the bottom. And all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pour in the mixture evenly until it's well distributed, and then I'm gonna garnish it with any kind of garnish that you would like. but in this case I'm just going to garnish it with some pistachios, and then I'm going to cover it up, let it sit in the fridge until it fully sets, which will probably take about a half an hour to an hour. So now that the Barfi is sitting in the fridge, we're going to move on to the Gulab Jamun. This is not your typical Gulab Jamun that's in the simple syrup that you know it as. This one is one that you're going to be frying and then dipping it into a simple syrup so that it kind of crystallizes on the outside. So first I'm going to start with a simple syrup, and all I'm going to do is just add in a pot, some sugar and some water, bring it up to a boil, and let it simmer until it becomes a really thick consistency. But in the meantime, we're going to prepare the dough for the Gulab Jamun. So as I mentioned earlier, this is not your typical Gulab Jamun where it's soaking in syrup. This one's going to be deep fried. We're going to deep fry the dough, and then we're going to just dip it in the simple syrup, which is going to be really thick, and then it's going to crystallize on the outside. But to make the dough, first I have some all-purpose flour. Next, I'm going to add some powdered milk. I'm going to add a touch of some cardamom. I removed the husk or the shell, so I just use the seeds. And finally, I'm going to add butter. But before I do that, I'm just going to give this a quick mix. Make sure all the ingredients are well incorporated. And I'm going to dust my hand, all the surfaces of my hand, so that when I touch the butter doesn't touch my hand or doesn't stick to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut the butter inside little by little until all of the butter is well incorporated. So once you incorporated the butter and it's nice and crumbly texture, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly add in the evaporated milk. Don't add it at the same time. Add it in batches and just use your hand and start folding it in. And eventually, as you continue to fold it in, you're going to notice a dough is forming. So once you get that nice dough consistency, then we're going to start shaping it into the desired shape. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shape it into around 2 inches, around the size of a football. So now I'm just going to shape out this dough and fold in this evaporated milk. So now that the dough is ready, just before we're about to shape the Gulab Jamun, I'm going to add actually a lot of canola oil in a pot. And the reason why I'm using canola oil is because it has a high heat tolerance. It won't burn when we turn it up to the specific temperature that we want it to be at. And on top of that, it doesn't have a very strong flavor that kind of affects the end product when we're making the Gulab Jamun. So make sure you put enough oil in a large pot, and we'll bring it up to around medium heat. We're going to do a tester to make sure that the heat isn't too hot. Ultimately, in the end, we want it to be golden brown. So now I'm just going to bring this up to around medium heat, and while this is heating up, we're going to go back to shaping the Gulab Jamun. So now we're ready to shape the Gulab Jamun. What I have here is just a tray, a bit of wax paper. You can also put some parchment paper underneath. Make sure you put something underneath so that way it doesn't stick to the bottom of your tray. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we always want to do a tester to make sure that our oil isn't too hot. If it cooks too fast and it burns on the outside but the inside is raw, then we would have wasted a batch, and we definitely don't want to do that. So just make a small tester, set it aside, and then the rest of them you can start to shape them out. Now I'm going to shape them up to around 2 inches each into roughly the size or the shape of a football. Now, to be honest, I'm not the greatest at shaping these out, so on camera they might look kind of ugly, but I'll shape them out to the best of my ability. So once you shape them out roughly to the shape of a football, we're going to continue to shape them out until all the dough is ready, and then we're going to go back to our fryer and we'll test out the oil. If it's ready, we'll start deep frying all of these Gulab Jamun. Okay, so now that the syrup has been reducing, I reduced it by around half. It's got a really nice thick consistency, so that way when we fry the gulab jamun, we can just dip it into the simple syrup. I know it's going to coat, crystallize a little bit on the outside, and it'll be ready to eat. But before I start cooking my batch, I'm just going to test out one piece of the gulab jamun just to make sure that the oil is at a nice temperature, and we'll know when it's cooked when it floats to the very top and it's got a nice golden brown crust around the outside. So now that this is golden brown, it's got a nice crust on the outside, I'm just going to remove it and soak it in the simple syrup. I'll probably soak it for at least like 3 to 5 minutes to make sure that the syrup is well infused into the gulab jamun. But in the meantime, now that we know that the temperature of our oil is at a good temperature, now we can start to fry off the rest of the gulab jamun. Alright, so here are the gulab jamun. I cooked them with 2 different colors. The first one's a little bit more of a darker brown, but the second batch is a little bit of a lighter brown. Cook it to your preferred preference. I personally prefer the first batch, which is a little bit darker. But now that everything is ready, I'm going to wrap this up, leave it out at room temperature, and then tomorrow when we come back, we're gonna work on the best recipe of them all, the jalebi. Alright, so now we're gonna make the best recipe out of the 3, the jalebi. So what I'm gonna start off with is I'm gonna make the simple syrup. There is a couple of ingredients that are gonna go in it. And the reason why we're gonna do this first is because we want it to reduce to a very nice, thick, syrupy consistency. So here I have some water. Next, I'm gonna toss in some sugar. I have a little bit of lemon juice just to help bind it all together and cut down the sweetness just a little bit, just to balance out the flavor. And lastly, I have some Iranian saffron. Personally, I wouldn't use Spanish saffron because it isn't as flavorful and as intense as Iranian saffron, but if you can only get your hands on Spanish saffron, then that definitely works. So now I'm going to bring this up to a simmer and continue to let it reduce until a nice thick syrupy consistency, and in the meantime we're going to start preparing the batter and heating up the oil to fry off the jalebi. Okay, so we're going to have a look and see how the batter is. It's been sitting in the oven overnight. It's got a bit of a fermented kind of smell to it, not very strong, but good enough where we can start to mix it and bring the batter all together. So I'm going to quickly mix it up again, and depending on what kind of utensils you have at home, you can either put it in a piping bag, or you could put it in a squeeze bottle. I personally prefer putting it in a squeeze bottle because it's a lot easier. So now I'm just going to give this a nice mix. I heated up the oil, and I'm just going to do a tester to make sure that the oil isn't too hot. Make sure that the jalebi has a nice golden brown on the outside and still cooked on the inside. And then we'll continue to cook off all this batter until we have a completed batch of jalebi. Then we can start plating. So now everything's ready to go. I've heated up my oil to the right temperature I'm looking for. The syrup is cooked down to a nice thick syrupy consistency. Now I'm ready to put everything together and fry off the jalebi. Don't forget, whatever utensil you're using, whether it's a squeeze bottle or it's a piping bag, make sure that you shake up the mix so that everything is all well incorporated before you fry off the jalebi. So what you're going to do is you're just going to make nice little twirls, and this pot is only big enough to fit one at a time, so I'm going to make them one at a time. So I'll just shape them into a nice jalebi shape. If they're not perfect, that's okay. Make sure it's golden brown before you flip it onto the other side. Cook the other side, and then we're going to put it in the simple syrup that we made. So once one side is brown, just use a fork or a perforated spoon and flip it to the other side. to have the same color and consistency. And then once this is cooked, we're gonna dump it and soak it in the syrup for around 3 to 5 minutes. And then we'll continue to cook off the rest of the jalebi. So today I'm joined by my girlfriend.
Hello.
Who will be taste testing all 3 of these recipes and giving all of you her unbiased opinion. So without further ado, time to dig in. Let's see how it is. I'm going to dig into the jalebi, which is my all-time favorite. In Iran, we have something similar to it, which is called zulubia. Absolutely delicious.
I'll be having the Gulab Jamun because that's also my favorite.
So good, very sweet, very crunchy. Absolutely delicious. And the Gulab Jamun?
Nah, it's okay.
That's a biased opinion.
No, it's actually really good. It is.
Yeah, so definitely try out these recipes. They're very easy to make. The maximum prep time takes altogether about an hour. But the longest part of making any of these recipes is usually the setting time for it to set in the fridge and then after that to slice them and whatnot. So definitely try it out. Let me know how it is. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing everyone next time.
Bye.